Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Lights, titled Little Machines. You know, the more I think about it, the more I'm kind of surprised that I didn't really get into Lights when I was at university a couple of years ago. I mean, at first glimpse, she was the sort of act that I would typically like. Indie pop with something of a focus on melody. Lights sparked a lot of early comparisons with Owl City and the release of her first album, The Listening, in 2009. Mostly for her keyboard-driven catchiness, her usage of auto-tune to augment the very synthetic sound, her occasional song that was circumspectly related to faith, and her lyrics that towed the line between twee and outright adolescent. In fact, it's probably that last part that kept me keeping some amount of distance and not going to her free concerts on campus. Her voice had more presence and power than Owl City's, but her lyrics never quite approached the same level of cleverness that occasionally saved Owl City from being insufferable. And to go by that first album, it'd be very easy, and you know what, somewhat unfair, to throw the Manic Pixie Dream Girl label on Lights. Emphasis on girl, because with songs like Pretend, there was a certain regression to childhood tendency that had some nuance on that album, but kind of rubbed me the wrong way, even if the ultimate message of that album did imply that maturity was the natural end goal, even if it wasn't all that desired. Well, apparently Lights wasn't a fan of those particular comparisons to Owl City either, because most of that cutesy image went right out the window for her sophomore release, Siberia, especially in terms of her instrumentation. The soft, fluttering keyboards and a lot of the effects were jettisoned in favor of this heavy, icy, dubstep-inspired synth pop, which gave the album a darker, grittier feel, and yet for some reason it didn't really carry over into the lyrics or Lights' presentation. If anything, despite her admittedly solid grasp of some interesting poetry, the subject matter felt a little bit more mundane and pop-friendly, lacking some of the nuance that had characterized that first album. On top of that, Siberia has not exactly aged well. While it might have preceded the dubstep-inspired flavor that would come into prominence across 2012, it feels very much of its time in terms of its mix balance and production. And as somebody who has never really all that been a fan of that upper to mid-range pop brand of dubstep, I gotta admit, it didn't really work for me. So I have to be honest, I had no idea what to expect with Lights' newest album, Little Machines, but I was definitely curious to find out, in addition to supporting yet another promising and interesting Canadian artist, this one from Toronto. So I checked out the album. What'd I get? Well, honestly, not a lot. Let me stress that I don't think Little Machines is a bad album, but in an increasingly crowded synth pop environment, especially now, Lights definitely falls into some of the tropes that don't really grip me about the genre. It's an album that also falls somewhere between The Listening and Siberia when it comes to instrumentation. And yet, despite bringing together a lot of the better elements from both albums, it doesn't really ascend above either of them in terms of quality, which is honestly a little bit frustrating for me. So let's start with the instrumentation and the production, which, as I said, finds the middle point between The Listening and Siberia, and then introduces a number of very modern elements to fuse it all together in the production. From The Listening comes the clear, shimmering synth tones that flutter about in the mix, lightweight and breezy, and not really carrying much of a driving melodic presence. A little bit chilly, but still intimate in a way that's vaguely reminiscent of Owl City. From Siberia comes some of the heavier, rough-edged, chunky beats that are lightweight enough, but fit reasonably with the synths, and can still inflate Lights' exuberance on some of the tracks to come across fairly well. And on top of that is this coating of reverb that has characterized so many indie and synth pop albums released this year in an attempt to add depth in the flimsiest way possible. Because, let's be honest, this album works best as trying to run on swirling adrenaline that can match the light synth tone and Lights' exuberant personality, and thus it's kind of unfortunate to see not many tracks on this album fall into this vein. Probably the best song is Running with the Boys, with the guitar accenting the chorus, but there's also the lead-off single Up We Go that tries to go for maximalist heft with fuzz-saturated synths against the distant guitar line, the decent synth interplay on speeding that really should have been a lot faster in tempo to match its subject matter, the early 80s inspired synth against the backing chorus on Muscle Memory, the decent bounce of meteorites, and the interweaving melodies and how we do it. But the problem here is twofold. First is a lack of really distinctive or interesting driving melodies in the keyboards to drive the songs just beyond the beat, and secondly, the more modern production that seems focused on emphasizing that beat and rendering the track a lot heavier and meaty than it probably should be, especially when it comes to Lights' presentation. Because this is a little bit of an issue when we take a look at Lights herself. I'll be honest, while her very girlish delivery did occasionally annoy me on The Listening, it at least fit the production. But here we're running into a case where the vocal production is still very synthetic, and Lights is singing louder and more stridently than ever. And when placed against some of the heavier, more cacophonous beats, it gives the tracks a lot of sharp edges that can feel very garish and overdone. I mean, the closest analog I can make is Churches, but Lauren Mayberry knew how to temper her very clear, loud tone with poise because it needed to match the darker subject matter in her lyrics. Lights, on the other hand, is all full force enthusiasm all the time, and that can kind of get exhausting, especially with a very aggressive synth tone. Granted, I prefer it to the tracks that feel smothered in reverb, and especially in the vocal effects where it's not needed, but honestly, that's not saying much to elevate above them. So okay, what about lyrics and themes? Well, remember when I said there was certain regression to childhood themes on the listening that kind of irked me, but at least had context to back it up? Little Machines tries something a little bit similar, emphasizing youthful naivete and carefree innocence in a way that seems aggressively cute and childlike. And I'll admit, right out of the gate, it's not my thing. I prefer my synth pop tempered with a little bit more gravitas or depth, like from Imogen Heap or Vienna Tang, or even some of Fox's darker material. And the frustrating thing is that Lights is an interesting lyricist. Her poetry has flavor and solid wordplay. She puts together some interesting symbolism and metaphors, but so much of it does not really add up to a lot. I do appreciate the purity of intentions behind her metaphors and symbols. Lights is definitely convincing on these tracks, and I'll admit that the exhilarating rush of songs like Running with the Boys and How We Do It, they kind of work in this vein. But you can only do so much beyond that, and when you do, I have a hard time connecting with what Lights puts forward. But you know what? Even considering that this music's audience probably is not me, probably younger, more innocent, especially given how the sexual imagery is pretty much absent from this album altogether, even on the relationship songs, can I say that it would work for a different audience? Well, here's the funny thing, I'm not sure it does, especially when Lights goes to address some slightly more serious subject matter. Songs like Same Sea and Muscle Memory about being separated from one's lover from a period of time. Oil and Water is about divorce, and Slow Down is a song asking for time itself to slow and give her more of a chance to experience the world. Now I have to ask the question, do these songs seem like they would fit from that childlike mindset? Do they seem like songs that a child or a younger person would ask? Look, even if it was asking, the issue is tone. The subject matter is very serious, but it's not played with any sort of convincing gravitas, either through the instrumentation or Lights herself. And then you get Meteorites, where Lights is excited to burst onto the scene and become a star on her third album after previous successes, but whatever. And then there's this lyric. Maybe we sound young and naive, or maybe we just want to believe. You know, it's a moment of real self-awareness that I actually did appreciate, and yet this self-awareness is nowhere else on this album, and same with the maturity. There's none of it, especially when you get to the next track, How We Do It, which basically completely rejects the glam desired by Meteorites, that basically boils down its message to maybe we live just to tell our story and how to get there. You know what, that's a good moral. The prog metal act Arion had the same moral off their record 01, 011, 001 with the lyric, the meaning of life is to give life meaning, and yet I don't quite get the same weight behind the lyric when Light says it. Why? Well, honestly, I think it comes down to the record as a whole lacking real drama or a tone or theme that goes beyond just upward-looking exuberance. And in a sense, that's fine. If Little Machines is exploring those adolescent feelings for that audience, I'd argue it mostly works. But when you get moments of self-awareness on this album or more mature subject matter lurking around the edges, it makes the album feel all the more thin and insubstantial. It can't back that subject matter up. In other words, this album is not clicking with me at all. There are a few songs that I like, but a lack of a real melodic focus and the production really hurts it. But you know what? I can see the appeal of this album, and for me, it's a solid 6 out of 10 and something of a recommendation, especially if you're a teenager and you're a fan of Lights' brand of synth pop. Otherwise, give it a listen, but Childlike Wonder can only take you so far, and I think Lights is hitting her endpoint in that regard. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.